Welcome to Practical AI in Healthcare, the podcast that cuts through the noise to spotlight real-world solutions delivering real-world value. From patient care to clinical research, from life sciences to patient engagement, we focus on what truly matters in healthcare today. No hype, no theory, just practical insights where AI is making a true impact. Dr. Stephen Lapkoff and Dr. Leanne Rosenblit are your hosts as we explore what's real and moving the needle in this exciting new domain. Welcome aboard and let's get to it. Last September, the DCI network hosted its inaugural Signal Through the Noise Healthcare AI Conference in Boston. It brought together healthcare delivery leaders, technology innovators, government officials, and engaged patients. We explored some of the most important real-world use cases in healthcare AI. This year, from September 23rd to the 25th, we'll reconvene in Boston for the next chapter, Signal Through the Noise, From Proof to Practice, Scaling Enterprise AI Across Healthcare Systems and Biopharma. The question this year is simple but urgent. Once we found the signal in the noise, how do we turn promising AI pilots into sustainable, trustworthy implementations across the healthcare ecosystem? If you're a fan of the podcast, we'd love to have you join the conversation live in Boston. Podcast listeners can receive 30% discounts on their registration with the discount code PracticalAI30. Come join us this September for Signal Through the Noise, From Proof to Practice. We hope to see you there. And now I'm stuck. I've got
That's this pretty much it.
Yeah. So welcome, Jeremy. How's it going?
It's going great. How are you both?
We're doing well. Jeremy, so first of all, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast. You're in a rarefied position. We've just had Zach on a few days ago, and I'm sure you know Zach Kahani. And, we know about your book. We know about your work in LLMs, as Leanne just described. Maybe you could explain a little bit for us about your book, what it's all about, and tell us a little bit about your hero's journey. How did you get where you are today and, get to be an author, get to write some fiction, and get to this position in your life and career? And then we'll dig into the rest of the podcast.
Well, once upon a time, a young man was born.
First, the earth cooled, and then the dinosaurs came and made oil.
Exactly. That's what my kids think, at least. I got my bachelor's in business from Ohio State, and my first job out of college was at Epic Systems, so EHRs. And I had no idea about EHRs, no idea about healthcare, but what a wonderful way to get introduced to our overall ecosystem in the healthcare world. And after I left there, I went and was an interface engineer for Wheeling Hospital in the West Virginia Panhandle, and had an opportunity at Oregon Health and Science for a full ride scholarship to do a master's degree. So I went and got a master's of biomedical informatics. And after that, I went and popped around and did some Epic installs because that's where I came from. And eventually a job lined up at Ohio State University as the director of research enterprise systems. And that's where I got into the research world. And so I've been in the research world now for about 13 years, I think. And so I did Ohio State for 5 years, went to Indiana University and Regenstrief Institute and Eskenazi Health for 3 years as the Chief Research Information Officer. And after I left there, I've been bopping around as an independent consultant, independent advisor, and been doing a lot of fun things, including writing a nonfiction book. I've also written a number of fiction books. And so it turns out that I like writing for some odd reason.
Well, that's awesome. We're thinking about doing a book on our podcast once we have enough episodes in the bank and we have enough content. I think we're actually getting there. We're pushing 40, up to 50 episodes at the moment. So that's a lot of content.
You may be our 50th, actually, depending on the exact release schedule. So congratulations. We should give you like flowers or something. And there ought to be confetti falling on you.
I'll take the badge.
Right. That's right.
Well,
so
there's your book. Oh, you got it up there.
Highly recommend writing a book. Your path is going to be a lot easier. I can't tell you how many hours I stared at a blank page just wondering what on earth should I be writing. And it turns out I have blank page syndrome, and it's just absolutely terrible when you write a sentence and take it away and write a sentence. So I wound up doing something a little unique. It was I'm writing this book before all of the legal analysis over what's copyright, what's not. So I couldn't use large language models to help me write the book, which is something I complain about in the book for obvious
Yeah.
reasons.
You did it the hard way, right? You
I
did
did
it
it the
the
hard way.
old-fashioned way.
So I found that the best way for me to go work on a blank page was to go for long walks and record myself. And then I did voice to text, and I'd have something that I could react to. It was always terrible, but it was something I could actually work with. And as long as I had something to work with, I was able to keep moving and get something out the door at the end of the day. And so that was kind of nice. And I imagine a series of podcasts like what you'll have will help a lot because it'll help you tell a story and have content already ready to go.
Yeah, and it's funny because the conversation that I was thinking of where you really dug into LLMs with me back in 2023 was actually about writing, right? Because I told you that at my semi-retirement moment was like, well, I'm going to try to write a book, and to my embarrassment, I'm still trying to write a book. But you were very kind and said, oh, I've been using LLMs for writing, not this particular book, but for your fiction. Let me show you how. And you kind of blew my mind. I'm like, whoa, that's very sophisticated, right? Like, because you were thinking about context management in a very sophisticated way while most of us were still trying to wrap our head around chatbots. So tell me that origin story, right? I mean, clearly you've got you gave us the kind of the healthcare informatics origin
Sure.
story, through Regenstrief, Oregon Health and Regenstrief, and which is really cool. But what put you in a position to think intelligently about LLMs and context management while the rest of us were still catching up?
Being a geek.
Yeah.
So I got on the large language model bandwagon before it was a large language model. And in large part because in research, you wind up touching a lot of different things. And so when the original GPTs were released, GPT-2, I was already on the bandwagon there, and I saw a future where we would be able to leverage them. I didn't see leveraging them like a chat engine, uh, and I approached it very much as a scientist of, oh, look,
Hmm.
I'll submit my query if it takes 60 seconds to get it back. I don't want to see where the LLM is trying to write something, retract, write, and go find the right path down the next token chain. And so the moment that you see ChatGPT and how intelligently they rolled out their user interface, it was the moment of like, I have
Mm-hmm.
done this wrong. So I actually wrote my own large language model before ChatGPT called Auto Grant Writer, where I was trying to help academics write their grants because I was like, grants are a very formulaic process.
Hmm.
Obviously, we should be able to have training data. And that is when I learned that it's hard to market, and being a marketer was not something that came intuitively to me. And so I've always been the type of person who writes a lot of random story ideas down. And so I've got dozens and dozens of documents that have, oh, this would be a really cool idea. And I never had the motivation, never had the mental fortitude to go sit down and actually build that out into a book. I'd sat down
Hmm.
and tried for 20 years. And so with ChatGPT, I said, look, I can finally take this one story idea that I had and make it real. And it turns out that it was terrible. It was terrible for a number of reasons. It was terrible that I didn't know what the hero's journey was. I didn't know how a story was supposed to be written. And it was terrible because I let ChatGPT just own too much of it.
Hmm.
And now when I write fiction, I use ChatGPT to help me get to here's my world building because I love world building and I can spend far too much time on that. And I have it ask me the questions I need to be able to write my story. And I have it help me build my ghostwriter script at the end of the day. And so I
Hmm.
get a 5-page document of exactly here's the ghostwriting script of what I'm going to be building out at the end of the day. And then I go out and I write that. But by treating myself as my own ghostwriter, I'm able to actually get past the blank page syndrome that I had with my nonfiction book and like I said, I've been into this early and I go back and forth over on artistic journeys, how much you actually
Yeah.
want to use computers. Um, and so I've
So
pulled back a
Jeremy,
little
let me
bit
let me
from
have
what we
drill
originally said.
into that for a second because I think it's such an interesting turn, right? So one is you were able to build up a hands-on experience with LLMs in knowledge production workflows early. But then you did this flip where you said, from where like speed is good, I can use this to accelerate stuff, to, hey, I want my own voice. Let me slow down. Tell me about that. You started on it, but tell me what that flip was like, and what is it like now?
So I think that the interesting thing is most people, when they write a book, a fiction book, it
Mhm.
takes 5 to 10 before they start writing good books. And when you consider how much work it is, a lot of
Yeah.
people stop after one because they just don't. If you haven't written a good book, people don't tend to read it as much and they won't do read through. And so for me, as I started to study this new craft that I was very interested in, I started to say, okay, what do I want to do? What am I trying to make a point? Am I just trying to make money? And in a large part, I want to tell fun and interesting stories. And for me, it's pursuing my art form. And so if I give my art form entirely over to the computer, it's no longer fun. I spent a good 6 months building a completely automated pipeline that will generate a book. And it took about $1,000 for O1 to build a book. And it was a good enough book that you could go out and sell it. And I had zero satisfaction from that. And that was just a really eye-opening experience for me. And like I said, for this book, I didn't use a large language model at all,
Yeah.
um, because I needed to have copyright. Well, the Taylor and Francis, who's the publisher of the textbook, needed to make sure that we didn't jeopardize any type of copyright. But for my fiction, I get to do whatever I want, and I get to pursue my bliss, I guess. And so
Yeah.
I got to be an artist for a year.
So let's come back to you trying to teach people about LLMs using your book. But I also know you taught workshops at EMEA for 2 years in a row
Yep.
that were trying to help the informatics community get caught up on LLMs. How has the audience in those workshops changed over that period?
So I thought it was really interesting how drastically the audience was different between the first year I taught it and the second year. The first year, it was still in the early stages of life. And lots of people who are very interested in, I want to bring this in, but I have no idea how. How are we going to be able to use these systems? And then I just got done teaching it the second time a couple months ago. And the people in the room were very anti large language models. And it was very much more, I have to know something about this. And so the questions that were being asked and the arguments being had were, okay, people are saying that this is going to be AGI, and I'm very much this isn't the path to AGI. If it is, I'll be happily wrong. But I think it's a very smart next token predictor. And with that, we will accomplish fantastic things that we thought required general intelligence. Um, and so we had long conversations in the workshop over how is it useful? Where is it useful? Where, how are we going to make sure that we are doing this in a very cautious way in healthcare? Because when you start being able to move fast, you start introducing the opportunity for really large flaws to come up, flaws that you wouldn't necessarily see ahead of time. Large language models can be exceptionally biased. So, one of the workshop tasks that I make everyone do is, hey, you're going to go tell your favorite large language model to go build a representative sample from your small town of people, and then go back and just have it as if it's a patient demographic database. And so when I do that for Indianapolis, do you know what happens? About 50% of the people are from Eli Lilly, which is one of our big employers.
Mm,
Indianapolis is a large city. 50% of any patient population is not going to be from a single employer. And so, unless it's directly on site.
yeah.
So, what it starts doing is you also start seeing all of the large language models, because originally they just give you 100 white people, have now started just going white, black, American Indian, and it no longer becomes a representative sample. And so when you're trying to build synthetic data, it's a very quick and easy way for people to start seeing we are introducing bias even as we are trying to limit the amount of bias that we're introducing. You can go in and you can say ahead of time, okay, this small town. So if we take Columbus, Indiana, give me the exact demographics. It still will struggle to generate synthetic data that are the demographics that it has just discussed.
Jeremy, just one clarification question on that. Wouldn't a approach, wouldn't a better approach, or rather, sorry, I really appreciate your approach for illustrating the problem, but if you were actually trying to solve the problem rather than illustrate it, wouldn't it just be a multi-step process where you say, let us design a programmatic way of developing synthetic data, build that out, just identify all the data sources that you need, and then run the program? And I mean, that's sort of like, I understand that would eliminate the educational value, but I just want to put that in the context of this is solvable. It's just not solvable by using LLM directly as the generator, right?
I 100% agree with that.
Yeah,
And the LLM, if you query it the right way, can give you all of the statistics that you need to solve this
right.
and feed into it. It's more of the fact that a number of people view large language models as having less bias than what we as humans do,
Yeah.
and trying to give them handheld, concrete examples that they're just going and asking the system and something that they would assume would not introduce bias, and then they'd see bias in what's being given back is a really useful thing in my mind to just help people understand these systems. We have trained them, we have uh, done our absolute best, but if we don't test them, if we don't plan ahead with them in healthcare in particular, we're going to have major issues.
So you're touching on a lot of topics that have come up in other discussions we've had on the podcast. I don't know if you've had a chance to listen to any of the other discussions, but you've raised points about bias that are kind of baked in. We've been flagging with a number of people that we're interviewing about bias and how to deal with it. But as we're going to go into the rest of the discussion, I'd like to dig into your book itself and kind of hear what's the nuts and bolts. I mean, we're not trying to push your book in terms of this being an infomercial for your book, but I'm genuinely interested in like what, you started this exercise well before everything got off the ground in a big way, and you saw it coming. A lot of us saw it coming. You dug in well ahead of most. So what's the thrust? What are you trying to say in the book and so forth?
Sure. So this is different from a book that is trying to teach you how to design and build your own large language model. The thrust of it was more of a business management side of things. And so I limited myself to a single chapter of math, and I left it at high school level math. Most of that is to convince you that this is not the path to AGI. This is no next token predictor. No matter what anyone is telling you, um, don't trust the system. Understand that it's a mathematical formula, and the math can be wrong sometimes, or the math isn't wrong, but the math can take you down a path that you don't expect. Explore in the book, what do you actually so one of the wonderful things about going through a formal publisher is that you don't just write a book and then it gets published. You go through multiple rounds of iteration and editing. And so the 12 months from the time I submitted it until we actually got to, hey, we're ready to have a published piece of product, gave me the opportunity to rewrite it a couple different times. And each
Like from
time I would raise
scratch?
it higher and higher levels. Um,
You rewrote from scratch, or you
Well,
just
not from
rewrote
scratch. We
chapters?
rewrote individual chapters, which wound up being just about all of the chapters, because
Wow.
the wonderful thing was we were at GPT-3 to GPT-4 to Gemini to all of the different models getting released, and having the opportunity to say, "Oh, look, this is all changing up what is the fundamentals that people will need to know? And so one of the fundamentals that I try and explore and talk about is, what kind of team do you need? Do you just need a
Mm,
prompt engineer? And at the time, everyone was saying, we just need prompt engineers. And talking through, well, here's where we actually need people who understand the nuts and bolts of the large language model. And hey, look, we've had AI for years, where we are trying to predict people who are going to come back and be readmitted. And we still need those people involved. And here's where we should be getting the clinicians involved. And one of the things that, you know, we've seen a huge amount of investment go into large language models for, hey, we don't want people to know how, we don't want to have people to require being a prompt engineer. And that makes a lot of sense when you are dealing with an individual, a prompt a single time. But it makes zero sense when you're talking about a healthcare system where you are running the same prompt 1,000 different times over 1,000 different scenarios. You want a very robust, well-built prompt. And so I go through and take specific examples as well in the book for, here's how you build a newsletter, and here's a prompt that you might use where it can help you generate a newsletter to asthmatics each month of the year, each quarter of the year. Here's specific examples of daily practice where we could actually inject large language models for our business workflows, for our patient interactions. And I went to HIMSS this spring, and a lot of the vendors are saying, we're going to get clinicians direct access to doing prompt engineering. And we're trying to get rid of them doing actual prompt engineering. We're taking their prompt, having a prompt go build that into a better prompt, and then we give them the output there in the background of the system. And so I think that there's a lot of value to be had in a basic level understanding of prompt engineering, a basic level of understanding
mm,
around, here's how we can leverage the system. The example that I use in my class is, back in the day, we all needed to know how to use search engines and be able to limit it to individual websites or individual date ranges. And very rarely in a search engine do I ever go use any of those skills anymore. And I think that eventually prompt engineering is going to be like that. In almost all situations, except the edge cases, you'll just be able to go ask the system and it'll figure out what you want from its context. But there will always be a place for having a deeper level of understanding of what's going on in the nuts and bolts of the system that lets you go a step beyond what the average user can do.
So, Jeremy, thank you for that. Who would be the best target for this book? Like, who is the intended audience? Is it healthcare professionals? Is it AI enthusiasts? What's your sweet spot that you were targeting?
Um, Healthcare IT and students were kind of where my brain was. I
mhm.
was originally thinking that it would probably be a HIMSS book. Um, Rutledge and Taylor and Francis does both the HIMSS side as well as others. And at the end of the day, um, I get a contract with them, and my stance for them was, I want this to get in as many people's hands as humanly possible. You're the experts here. They were lovely, and they said, "Oh, what book cover do you want?" And I'm like, I don't care. Go to your marketing people, and whatever will sell the best, choose that one. And so, pragmatically, uh, this is the position that they thought would be the best way to get in as many people's hands as possible.
So, give us an example of a one of your playbooks from the book that people could latch onto and really dig into immediately after giving it a read.
So, I try and build things into something simple that everyone can understand. So, ambient listening, it has come out into our entire ecosystem in a very, very fast way because all the clinicians wanted it. Ambient listening at its heart is, we go record your voice, and then we take that voice and transcribe it to text, and then we take that text and we put it into a large language model with a prompt. And so, I walk through how we evaluate large language model vendors' maturity. And one of the ways that you can evaluate their maturity is just going and looking and saying, what prompt are they using to take that text that we generate from the voice and move it into a note that is actionable for our patient population and actionable for our physicians, and making sure that we're doing something in a very useful manner.
So thanks for that. Let's, you and I and Leon, we've never seen this technology take any technology in healthcare take off at this pace. Um, it's being adopted at a rate which is truly staggering. You mentioned HIMSS. I've been to HIMSS a couple of times since they launched, and I'm astounded as to how fast it's happening. Um, what's your take on why that's happening? Maybe you could
It,
unpack
it,
your perspective.
and before you
Sure.
do, I just got to say, like we were just our mutual friend Peter Emby was just on the pod, and he had the best line, which is, "This is the first time in my career where I'm trying to slow down the pace of technology adoption in healthcare." And we're like, yes, this is really is the first time, right? Usually we got our shoulders to the wheel saying, please stop using fax machines, right? Like the punch cards, you can retire them. And this time I see informaticists and other nerds just saying, hang on, we need governance, right? Let's chill out. So I would love to get your take on where things are.
Yeah, so I think the reason that we saw it is because physicians needed answers and needed, and this was good enough for them. And the scary thing to me is it may or may not actually be good enough for them in many situations. 80 to 90% of the time, it gets everything accurate enough that you're happy to go. It's figuring out how you're going to catch that 10% of the time where it gets something wrong. And, you know, because we haven't had the world of, so as you all know, and we've all experienced in the past, we've for every new technology, we had the early adopters, the people who were on the bleeding edge, who were the 5% who go and adopt everything. And they always went and documented everything, and they told everyone, I've done this really cool, amazing thing that takes over the world. Um, we didn't have that this time. This time, everyone implemented all of these solutions at the same time. And when you have that, it really creates a very different beast. And I think that we're going to see the next few years, 3 to 5 years probably, where the majority of the industry just says stop. We're not going to keep trying to implement things with ambient listening. We're not going to try and improve it in any meaningful way. We're just going to take what we've implemented with our vendors, because these are the people who are not used to the bleeding edge, and these are the people who don't really want to be on the bleeding edge. They were pushed there because the clinician said, oh, look, this can save me hours of my day. And this can help with something that is perceived as very trivial in many ways. And, when I was at HIMSS and I was teaching my workshop there, I had a physician say, look, it doesn't really matter to me if 5% of them have errors. It gets my job done faster. And to me, that the errors won't matter until they do matter. And
Right.
it's hard to predict what errors are
Yeah.
going to matter ahead of time, because you know an error that says this person has clinical depression may not really matter that much. I had at one point clinical depression labeled on my chart, and I did not have clinical depression by any means, but that's what they filed to my insurance company, and I had to go fight that for multiple years, where I was labeled with that. Um, However, there are other diagnostics that could dramatically impact my care and dramatically impact what's going on, and dramatically impact my eligibility for insurance, even. And so, because we can't really, with any confidence, say this is the number of errors that are occurring with ambient listening, to me, that is a danger that
Mhm.
we wouldn't traditionally have implemented in nearly the level of wide rollout that we've done in the past. The healthcare system's answer to it is, well, it's still on the physician. If the physician isn't reviewing it and being accurate, then they lose their licensure. It's not really going to come back and impact the healthcare system. And I think that's a shame, because really it's not about the physician, it's about the patient. And how is this going to impact the patient in the long run? And is it going to result in them having better care or worse care? And if we're rolling out things that we know have errors, um, I have a hard time thinking that it's going to result in them having better care over the long run.
Do you think that this issue, we've had some folks on the podcast where we've been asking about the need for a clearinghouse of sorts to have this issue of the safety that you're pointing out uh, made as transparent as what's been out there with, let's say, MedWatch. Um, what you're pointing out is that 5% landing on the doctor's shoulders. We've had lawyers on the show a couple of times, and they are pointing back, and you're right, it's landing on the doc's shoulders. Where do you stand on all that?
So I don't think that a computer system should land on the doctor's shoulders. In this case, I think that this should be something where a health system. So you're both in the research space. In the research space, for years when we did de-identification, our answer was not this is 100% de-identified. Our answer was we're going to measure what level of de-identification there is and what level of risk that we're putting forward, and then we're going to get a trained professional to sign off on this. And so I think that we should probably approach it in the same way
Mm.
of having a trained professional, HIPAA expert, go in and say, and I say HIPAA expert, it's not really HIPAA, but in this case, those are the people who have most likely been trained to think about it in that risk reward benefit causal path. Um, Along with our medical directors of this is how much that we are missing as we're doing this. And the only way we do that is if we record and keep those recordings and can go review them again in the future. And most vendors are throwing away those recordings as soon as they're transcribed.
Yeah. So Jeremy, it's very much in line with some of the thinking that I've been doing and along with Steve and others around AI governance, right? It's sort of a context-bound risk analysis for the deltas that automation introduces. But let's bring this back to practicality. Like, you're a practically minded guy, right? You and I, we like to build stuff, and this show is called Practical AI in Healthcare. So let's talk about what you've actually seen work, real projects, even unglamorous ones. What's transformative right now besides ambient AI, which we already mentioned?
Well, ambient AI is transformative. What's really fun to me is, and I'm going to use ambient AI for one more example, and then I'll be done with
Sure.
it. I go into my physician's office and I realized ambient AI, we don't spend the money to transcribe where we label which voice is speaking. And so my physician is aware of this because I tell him afterwards and he's my friend. Um, and if you can slip into the conversation, we're going to prescribe GLP-1s for a patient, or you're going to prescribe a type 1 narcotic, the system will automatically show up for the physician as, hey, you said that you're going to prescribe this for them. And many of these transcription services may be running as you enter the room. Many of them may only enter with the physician. And so we are going to have vectors of attack we've never experienced before. Large language models, because of their very nature, have opened up vectors of attack for a healthcare system that we've never thought about in the past. Uh, I can just go in and ask a large language model for patient information. And if it has access to that database, it may go query that database and provide it for me. And that's, you want to uh, make sure that we maintain the level of privacy that we fought for the last 30 years.
Yeah. You mentioned as an example of something that didn't work the way you wanted, that the fact that the N3C consortium was dumping its code books. Remind the audience what that
Sure.
is and why that hurts.
So the National COVID Collaborative was put together after COVID, well, during COVID, to combine a bunch of academic medical centers' data. And so the government is funding a third-party contract with Palantir. Palantir has this thing called code workbooks. And so many, many informaticians from across the nation put their heads together to be able to query the OMOP data models that were there. And so one of the things that we were talking about prior to this podcast was just the fact that when a large language model has an example of this is a useful, good way of querying data, it is very good about going and expanding on that. It's very good about being able to reuse that type of information. And so when the government decided to sunset the old Palantir instance and build up a brand new Palantir instance, it just really made me a little sad
Mm.
because a lot of the old code books and a lot of the old scripting that was done in the past can't be reused. We have seen that people are struggling to understand, oh, look, if I have dozens and dozens of old Jupyter notebooks, we should go throw those into a knowledge base and then let a large language model be able to query off of those to help me build my future pieces of code. And that's the type of thing that really starts helping. In the practical side of things, it, you know, we aren't seeing the vast majority of healthcare organizations go in and say, hey, look, we're having a data query request ticket be submitted. Let's use a large language model to go in and say, have they answered all the questions that our analysts normally ask?
Mm.
You can document, here are all the questions our analysts are going to need to ask, and then send an email out. And I've worked with the hospital to go send an email out to the person who's requesting to say, hey, can you give us this additional information? And so that when you actually go to have that one-on-one meeting with the clinician who's asking for a data warehouse request, you have a meaningful meeting rather than just, hey, look, we've got your ticket, but we need to get all of this additional information before we can even go start asking questions of uh, the nature that you're interested in.
So it's super interesting. But what you're pointing out is that there's an unrecognized opportunity that's being lost uh, of repurposing operational data into learning data sets for AI models. In a way, it's similar to the tragedy of what people complain about with real world data, real world evidence, with healthcare data. But the same thing is happening with operational data, where we don't recognize its value as a potential knowledge graph that could be constructed. So I think that's a really cool thing to keep an eye on. But I wanted to ask you about sort of the future of build versus buy and how we protect and how organizations think about protecting health data. So right now, hospitals are renting intelligence, right? And they're
Yeah.
paying third-party vendors per token, and their concerns about privacy and what do enterprise accounts actually mean and protect. Where do you think that goes in the future, and what makes healthcare different from other industries?
Sure. So I think that we are finding that we can do more with smaller models than we ever expected. I
Mm-hmm.
have a GPT 4.0 equivalent running on my local machine that is called Gemma or Quinn. Um, one of the things that I did in my book was I went and did the math over um, an iPhone Pro versus a supercomputer. And an iPhone Pro is as good as the supercomputer from 20 years ago. And so to me, we're going to see these small models get smarter and smarter until we hit an asymptote, and we haven't hit it yet.
Mm-hmm.
And as you get smarter models that can be run on smaller and smaller devices, we're obviously going to start using those in-house. And so we've seen most of the large AI vendors subsidizing the total overall cost of these tokens, and billions of dollars poured in. And the likelihood is high that at some point people are going to start saying, hey, we want to charge and actually make a substantial profit here. And I think that for healthcare in particular, we'll see there's, we, for the most part, haven't given up our servers. We haven't given up our ability to do in-house IT work for a very logical reason. We want to protect the patient data, and um, I think that we will start seeing more and more of this intelligence work coming back in-house. We've made it simpler and easier for people to run than it's ever been in the past, and uh, you know. Uh, OpenClaw, for example, if you guys have heard of that, lots of people went out and bought little Mac Minis so that they could run it for their own self to have an equivalent of someone who is, an administrative assistant. And so I think that we're only going to see that continue to expand, and that organizations will probably um, at least have the option of coming in-house. DeepSeek, the Chinese models are being released for free where they are as good as the best of the breed for these billion-dollar companies, Anthropic or ChatGPT. And so I think that it's very likely that we're going to continue having conversations over uh, where's our best bang for the buck and what is going to protect patients the best. And
Yeah.
leveraging third-party systems, we're all going to trust AWS and Google, but a lot of these other vendors don't have the rich history of what it takes to deliver safe and secure healthcare enclave. And
Right.
uh,
But I think
uh,
what you're pointing out is something really important. That is that there are engineering solutions to the endemic privacy and security problems, right? So, often we think about those as endemic to our space, and they really are. But we have engineering options such as taking things in house, right, and building focused in house models that are under control of the institution that you do trust in order to solve them. And it's been one of my pet peeves, right? We often approach limitations of current technology as philosophical problems, and because I've been trying to work on AI governance, I find there are a lot more handles on the world and lots more affordances if you try to transform them into scientific or engineering problems. Scientific when we don't have the knowledge, right? We don't understand. And engineering when we kind of know what, but we don't know how. But both of those feel much more tractable to me than sort of shrugging or becoming despondent or just being a wide-eyed optimist and ignoring it. But I want to come back to it's a sort of something that you do, just coming back from AI as a whole, but something that you do in your personal life that struck me as really, really interesting. Which is, you told me that you delete your entire history with these models on a regular basis. Why would anybody do that, and what does that teach you?
so these models are trying to build a history and a profile on who you are. And so I find that these models behave very differently as they have different profiles built up, and that there's a lot to be learned just on what these models can and can't do based on their native capability versus what they're doing about trying to learn who you are. And so I didn't delete Gemini for about 3 months because I was working on a number of projects and code books that I just didn't want to copy out. And um, it was fascinating to me because it became it started telling me I was genius in every other conversation because I was working on code and I was telling it,
But
here,
Jeremy, you are a genius. That's
I
the
like
most
to hear
clever
that
thing
joke.
ever I've ever heard. Yeah.
You think that you're good, so it drops it first when you're doing code and you're like, yeah, and I just told it to do something different, and oh
Yeah.
yeah, okay, great. Um, and then it starts dropping into every other conversation. You realize it's just pandering, and more of the memory is more about pandering to you than actually helping you. And so I had a midlife crisis and I bought a little Chinese mini excavator, and I should not have done this. Um,
Mini excavate like for digging holes?
yeah, for digging holes. Um,
Okay.
I mean, it's better than a sports car. I dig it.
it's better
No,
than a
no pun
sports car.
intended. I'm
It's
like,
a little
yeah,
tiny.
yeah.
Um, and
That's the
so
first. I've never heard anybody say they went out and bought a steam
I
shovel.
love it. I'm jealous. I want one. I don't even
it
have
has
like,
this very unique memory about
yeah.
this, and it has a unique memory about my kids. And then I'll drop those in to every conversation. I'm like, seriously, the mini excavator is a random side project that's just a mild midlife crisis. They're super cheap these days if you get them at auction, $2,000 to $5,000. Um,
I
you've
should go out
spent
and
more
buy
of
one.
that. You've spent more than that on a camera system. I
That's
have
very
no doubt.
true, actually. I do.
It's very true
Not
for
wrong.
Steve. I don't know if you know, but he's a very serious astrophotographer.
Oh
And
my goodness.
yeah,
The EMEA where he did it over the Washington Monument with the moon was
yeah,
Yes.
just a
yeah. So
phenomenal photo.
Oh,
yeah.
thank you.
Um, but it, it's very telling as you work with these systems to find out what is just pandering and what is trying what is actually useful. And so for me, deleting all memory and then having it watch what it's trying to grab about who I am and what I'm asking and how I'm asking it it tells me an awful lot about the fundamental capabilities of the system. And in general, I just don't think that this memory thing is nearly as useful as what they make it out to be.
So I'm fascinated by this in part, but I think it's an incredible teaching and learning exercise, which I've done it inadvertently when whenever I switch systems or try out new ones, you sort of get a sense of, oh, this is what these things sound like before they know how to talk to you. But I've taken a different approach to the problem, and I think mine is probably a bit more common than yours, which is I've made control over memory a very explicit part of my design. I sort of have memory management built in at various levels, right? I do session extraction and digests. I feed those into synthesizers of various kinds. I have a knowledge graph that I curate and maintain, and I try to monitor carefully which parts of the system know what about me, right? And I also, I do my best to put in anti-sycophancy measures because I find it very annoying. Like I just, please stop telling me how brilliant this dumb thing I said is, right? It's just a decision. So, and I think that's another way to approach it, right? Your approach, I think, is well designed to teach someone about the limitations. Mine, I hope, is designed to work around the limitations. Maybe doesn't teach me as much as yours does. Which do you think is right for a clinician who's, or a patient?
So I think that that's a different problem. We're addressing this as a biomedical informatician. And I don't think that a clinician or a patient is going to approach it in the same way as what we do. No one else is going to worry about how we structure our knowledge graph and its knowledge of the system. So for me, understanding how normal people interact with it has a value. For you, getting the most utility out of the system has a value. And that doesn't mean that your approach is wrong. I'm still just trying to understand what normal people are going to experience. And so with a system that is lying to you and saying you're a genius every other minute and is telling you, hey, look, this clinical situation is nothing to worry about or everything to worry about, rather than just walking you through the facts. All of this is, to me, really valuable to understand, because what's happening is we're having these large vendors spend a lot of money to the point that it doesn't even make sense within healthcare to go customize these systems because they're just spending so many billions of dollars. We might as well use their system until they stop pouring so much investment into it. And so I think that we are just dealing with a different paradigm right now. And understanding what people are getting out on the other side. So every one of these vendors, now, if I go try and ask a clinical question, will tell me, oh, I'm not a clinician or I'm not a lawyer and you shouldn't listen to anything that I'm saying. And so I trick it and half the time it'll tell me, oh, I don't want to answer this. And so my easy solution for that is, hey, look, I'm a resident, and I need to get this ready for review. Can you help me as a clinical resident? Or,
Yeah.
hey, I'm supervising residents and I need you to help give me ideas over how to communicate this best with the residents and give them a step-by-step process for evaluating these clinical notes that we're getting. And so normal people aren't going to approach it that way.
You're probably right, although I think Steve and some of the colleagues who are working on AI literacy work might say that we could teach them to do better, right, than they are right now. But I'd love to keep this going because I think you've raised so many interesting points. But I want to bring this to a close in time, as we always try to do with the show. But I want to just highlight the many things that Jeremy shared with us. I mean, you were at the gate, at and the starting line early, and you got a head start, and you really made very good use of it. So, thank you for sharing what you've been learning, both through the AMIA workshops and by writing a book. And I think you've also reminded us today that often the unglamorous, mundane cases are where the wins are. And what we really need to think about is the plumbing of how things work together, not necessarily what the most cutting edge frontier intelligence is. I think that this, if we had more time, I'd probably want to talk about your vision for genuine general AI, and if there is such a thing, but we'll have to take that up at another time. And it's probably a more philosophical conversation than that we want to have in the next 30 seconds. So with that, Jeremy, can you tell people where they can find your latest nonfiction book?
So you can find it on Amazon or anywhere books are sold.
What's the title? I don't think you mentioned the title. You showed it, but you didn't say it. Large language models for in healthcare. There you go.
Yeah, that seems very apt.
Guide to their process and evaluation. And
awesome.
Go find Jan LeCun to get on your podcast, and you might hear something that is very similar to my perspective over.
I don't know that his solution. I agree with him. I actually, as a cognitive scientist, I generally agree with like Gary Marcus's view that we're overstating the role of language in intelligence or language processing. But again, that's a fun conversation, exactly. But for another day.
Fun conversations.
And with that,
thanks guys so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. It's fun chit-chatting and just catching up. We're at an era where the other thing for everyone to remember is every healthcare organization is going to choose the dumbest large language model they can get away with to do any task. And because it's the cheapest way to do it.
It's the joke, Jeremy. It's the old joke about NASA, right? It's it's sending out a billion pounds of explosive built by the lowest bid contractor, right? So
it's the exact same situation.
But it does make it to orbit once in a while, so we got to remember that. But with that, I want to thank Steve and Jeremy. Thank you for joining us and for a delightful conversation. I want to thank our audience for tuning in, and look forward to seeing all of you again next week for another exciting episode of Practical AI in Healthcare.
Thank you for joining us this week on Practical AI in Healthcare. If you're ready to go beyond buzzwords and hype and explore how AI is truly transforming healthcare, stay tuned for more conversations that get us to what works. Until next time, stay practical.